the United States carried out what is probably a war crime by massacring more than 120 kids in an elementary school.
So first off,
you know what's in the air, you know what's in the air, you know what's in the air, you know what's in the air. It's possibility, it's possibility, it's possibility, it's possibility.
All right, so Mehdi Hasan did this debate format thing with Al Jazeera. He's done this at least one other time, but this is called Head to Head, where it's essentially like an on-stage debate with Mehdi playing more of a journalist role, coming with a bunch of prepared facts and information. And in this episode, he's grilling this guy who is like a think tank war strategist type of dude. He works at a place called the Thayer Marshall Institute and has been pretty consistent in his support for this war effort in Iran, as well as generally that type of war effort. And he, used to work at the Pentagon and be in the military, etc. And so he is acting as the stand-in here for American policy and Israeli policy, honestly, when it comes to this Iran war and a few other subjects. And so he essentially just gets grilled relentlessly by Mehdi. And then there's a kind of a panel of other journalists and experts that chime in a little bit, as well as an audience segment. But Mehdi Hasan really does a good job of grilling this dude. And there's a couple moments during this exchange where the guy really just kind of falls into a trap of his own making, and then Mehdi gets to kind of just really dig into him. So it becomes clear just how little guys like this have to work with anymore on this war, and what an awkward position they've put themselves in, having to explain the outcome of it. So here's the first part where he first claims that the intention of this was not to destroy Iran's nuclear program, but rather it was other things. And because of that, he thinks it's a success, as well as trying to continue the debate about whether or not America is responsible for blowing up the school full of girls in Iran, and even if we did do it, whether or not it was a good thing or allowed.
So there are four objectives going in. I measured it on its own terms. So first off, regime change was not the aim of this campaign. So there were four objectives. The first is to destroy the air defense network. That has pretty much been done, and when it was trying to be reconstituted, we saw the Israeli strikes were aimed at that. The second was to set back the nuclear program, preferably destroy it, to a point where it cannot be easily reconstituted. The third was to degrade or destroy Iran's drone and missile capability. We have not seen militarily significant missile launches. And then the fourth was to deplete the regime, particularly the internal security aspects of the regime, so that if there is an uprising, it wouldn't go through. So at the time I wrote that, which admittedly was in the fifth week of a 2-week war, most of those objectives, I think, had been achieved.
So on the first day of this war, as you know, the United States carried out what is probably a war crime by massacring more than 120 kids in an elementary school.
So first off, again, we will not know for sure what is it. I lived through the period of in the Clinton administration where we had strikes on Iraq, which was also under sanctions. Those were reported as baby milk factories, and after the fact, we saw that that wasn't quite the same there.
But there's no debate about the school.
Well, the school we can talk about.
In fact, let's talk about the school. In the days following the attack on the school, you were on Twitter casting doubt that a US strike was responsible for blowing up a school full of children in Minab. A preliminary US internal military investigation confirms it was a US missile. Do you now acknowledge that you were wrong, that the US was responsible for this horrific massacre?
Hold on. So first off, massacre implies intent. So what you're asking me to agree to is a statement that the people who dropped around in the context of 800 airstrikes intended to strike a school knowing it was a school. I can't agree with that. But secondly, at the time, people were taking just the word of the regime. We didn't know what we knew then about missiles and swords.
So you accept you were wrong now?
I accept that I may be wrong. We do not know for sure.
You still don't know if you still think it might not be a US missile?
I think that it might, well, hold on. This is going to sound Jesuitical to you, but the word you used is massacre, which implies an element of intent. I think the worst case scenario...
You do realize that even without intent, something can still be a war crime if it's reckless.
Well, but there is a key definition in there, which is the level of care and the level of carelessness. In a country that is determined to commit war crimes, you would have, in the context of 800 airstrikes, you would have more than one school hit in the first night. Hold on.
Unfortunately, I've got more. On February the 28th.
Hold on.
You made a point. On February the 28th, the Pentagon used missiles untested in combat, according to New York Times, That bombed a sports hall used by a female volleyball team. They killed 21 people, including multiple children. That was also on the first day of the war. We just didn't know about it till weeks later because the United States government covered it up. It required the New York Times to use satellite imagery to find this out.
I am unfamiliar with that instance, but I will tell you that if your crack research team gets on it, you will see that there were instances where the besieged moved from their headquarters into sports halls as sheltering positions.
This sounds like a very Israeli argument here, that they brought it on themselves with human shields.
That's not what I'm saying.
In fact, here's what you did say, David. You said on Twitter,
yes,
Wikipedia says the Minab school is located 600 meters from the headquarters of the IRGC Navy Asif Brigade and used to be part of the base.
Yes.
Which sounds like you're justifying the massacre of kids by saying, well, the military base was nearby, so it's their fault. I would point out to you that U.S. Marine Corps base in Quantico, Virginia, is very close to the Crossroads Elementary School.
Yeah.
If the Iranians or one of their proxies, God forbid, bombed Crossroads Elementary School and said, well, it was the U.S. Marine Corps' fault for building a base near the school, we would all condemn that. So would you, wouldn't you?
Well, first off, let's take a step back and assume that the United States deliberately wanted to kill children in a school.
That.
No,
I said,
but let's just
it's
assume this. Let's just assume this, okay? Why would you assault a regional headquarters that has no influence on policy when you could kill the children of the regime leaders in
Right, so a real compelling argument from him there, which is even if America wanted to kill children, the smarter children to kill would be children close to the regime, important children. Why would we kill this random school full of children? Everybody knows the reason why. It is to show that America doesn't give a fuck and will just do things like that. We don't care about the sovereignty of your people or who you're trying to educate or who we kill. That's the obvious intention there, and he knows that. That's, again, why he does what he does. And you can really see the depravity here. It's on display, first of all, in what he says about this claim that it was never the goal to denuclearize Iran, even though that's what Trump said multiple times. Marco Rubio said that. We were told that they had already been denuclearized. Then we were told that that's why this was absolutely necessary. So at very least, what you can take away from what this guy's saying, if you take everything he's saying to be true, is that Trump has been lying the whole time and Trump is full of shit, which we already know, but also that he's actively confusing this entire process. So if you take what this guy says to be an accurate representation of what the Pentagon wanted in this instance, which his layout of what the Pentagon was going to be able to do in a conflict like this before it happened was pretty accurate in terms of how the stages of the war would commence. But him, like many others, and I believe that guys who think like this are the ones who walked us into this war, you know, in collaboration with the Israeli lobby, etc. These are the Americans that were telling Trump, telling his cabinet, and trying to convince the rest of us that this was going to work, that they were going to fold, and we've seen now that that is wrong. And this guy has said that we miscalculated in thinking that this was going to be something that could be accomplished by airstrikes, which is becoming clear. And the only reason he's not advocating for boots on the ground is because it's clear the window has closed for that. If that was the decision, that's the important thing to point out about all of these warmonger guys, Scott Jennings on CNN, all of them who are caping from this from a sort of old school conservative perspective. They all 100% would advocate for every beat as much as America wanted to escalate. Boots on the ground, nuclear weapons. I mean, this guy is literally splitting hairs about blowing up a bunch of school children, trying to turn the argument into the word massacre instead of talking about the fact that America did that. He's saying that they didn't deliberately do it. There was a base nearby. Mehdi Hasan points him out on that. I remember seeing that tweet, actually, when he made it. He was one of the only people who was willing to come out and say something like that. That's the purpose a guy like this serves. He says things that he and the people behind him, the people at this institute, as well as wherever the fuck his money comes from, they all know that nobody else is willing to say this. Very few people are willing to put their face to this type of ideology, to this type of commentary, especially at this point in the war. And so they're well compensated for doing it, and they know that their goal isn't to look good. Their goal is to just put something out there. That's all they gotta fucking do, is put something out there. They'll get paid handsomely, and that usually is enough to keep this sort of colonial industry project going. So here's the next part where they go back a little bit further, discuss some of the context here in terms of America's conduct in Iran, as well as the CIA. He actually reposted some of these clips himself, which is a little bizarre because he does not look great in this part. So here's that.
we have 3 or 4 issues that go back across administrations. One was the use of proxies. Recall the Syrian civil war was going on at the time. Iranian forces and Iranian officer militias, Hezbollah, were there. Another was the ballistic missile, which is actually of more concern to our Gulf allies than the nuclear program. And then, of course, there's the ongoing nature of the government, human rights, things of that nature.
But your argument is the JCPOA didn't cover these issues, so it was a bad deal.
Look, let me tell you how bad it was. So we focused on the nuclear issue. We gave them license everywhere else.
But do you agree that the nuclear bit worked? Before we go to the other bit.
I honestly didn't pay enough attention to it because I was focused on the other issues.
You didn't pay attention to it. We're at war because of it.
Let me tell you, no, we're not.
We're not at war.
That is
we're not at war.
I just laid out.
You just admit we're not at war because of the nuclear.
I just laid out 4 issues there, and at the start of the program, I laid out 4 issues. This is one of 4.
Do you accept that the government that you served, the military you were part of, has done some pretty bad things against Iran?
Well, yes.
I mean,
yes,
helping
yes,
Saddam Hussein gas Iranians,
let me go.
Shooting down a civilian airliner with 290 people.
I don't accept the United States had knowledge and enabled Saddam Hussein in advance to
we gave them
gas
satellite information. We gave them targeting help.
And
that's what the people at the time have said. Ronald Reagan said Iraq cannot afford to lose. We must back Iraq.
But to move to the use of chemical weapons in that is a step that I do not accept. But let me go a little further back.
I got to push back here.
Back.
Rick Francona, who was a U.S. colonel at the time, he was a defense liaison in Iraq at the time, he said the U.S. had firm evidence of Iraqi chemical attacks beginning in 1983. He says we didn't need them to tell them they were doing it, we already knew, and yet we still helped them target Iranian troops with those chemical weapons.
No, we helped them target Iranian troops. The use of chemical weapons, I think, is something that remains to be seen. I know Rick Francona, but I think you're drawing a little bit too much.
When the CIA and the MI6 here from the UK overthrew Iran's elected Prime Minister Mohammad Mossadegh in 1953, the US then supported 26 years of a brutal dictatorship under the Shah, who had a secret police that tortured people, as you know, disappeared opponents. How can the US claim, as you suggested in part 1, to want democracy and a better government in Iran when we helped get rid of the only democratic government they had?
Well, first off, not a democratic government. If you look at the nature, there wasn't a popular referendum on Mossadegh.
Mohammad Mossadegh was an elected prime minister.
Mohammad Mossadegh was an appointed prime minister.
Sorry?
An appointed prime minister served at the pleasure of the Shah, according to the Iranian constitution.
Do you know what country you're in right now?
Yes, I do.
Do you know how Keir Starmer became prime minister of the UK?
Yes, I do.
He was appointed by the king. Does that mean we don't have a democratic government?
I think
parliamentary systems, that's how it works.
Are you claiming that the electoral system in Iran in 1953 is the same as in the UK today?
No, I'm suggesting that you as an American are not understanding that parliamentary systems don't require a direct election to be democratic. He was elected to parliament in 1923. He served in the Majlis, the Iranian parliament.
Yes.
When he became prime minister, he was an elected member of parliament. It was a democratic government by the definition of that time. Was it a liberal democratic government? We can argue about it. But it was clearly elected by the people. And we overthrew it in a coup that the CIA long ago admitted to. Or are you going to deny that as well?
Well, let me ask you, do you accept that the king can dismiss the prime minister?
So at the end there, he really walks right into a trap, kind of sets the trap himself. He's playing semantics here about whether or not the leader that was overthrown by America was appointed or was democratically elected. And it's not that he doesn't know the difference or he doesn't know that they were elected and then appointed, ceremoniously. He just is playing semantics. That's what he has done throughout this interview, trying to just find a little hinge point that he can use to talk for a few seconds and fill up space and not really address the point. That works on like a CNN debate or maybe Piers Morgan, where it's very hard to insert context because you're so deep in trying to get your point out with another person. Whereas here, where Mehdi Hasan can kind of dig in and has control, that doesn't really work very well. And he makes his point at the beginning there where he says that the reason the original Iran deal, the one that Trump backed out of, that Obama got, the reason that was bad is because it didn't address all these other things like ballistic missiles, etc. But it did address nuclear. Mehdi Hasan tries to get him to admit, do you admit that it achieved its goal in preventing Iran from having nuclear weapons? This guy says, I don't know, I wasn't paying attention to that part of it. So that's a lie, first of all. This is this guy's job. He definitely was aware of that specific element of it. But also, he's being consistent here because he's saying that what we did accomplish in Iran in this recent Trump war is degradation of their missile capability, blah, 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 everything but the nuclear program, which is what Trump was telling us this was about. And he's also saying that that's the reason he didn't like the JCPOA. So what that means is that his opinion on this is pretty in lockstep, maybe not with the original intentions of this war, certainly not what Israel's continuing intentions are, but with what they can sort of settle for, which is degradation of the missile capability of Iran, which allows America to continue to have supremacy there and to continue to have a thriving market between that in America and Israel. So essentially what he is signaling here is that this is a good victory to take for now. And because we are just putting a pin in the nuclear thing, we can always come back to that later. So that's what keeps the wheel spinning here. It allows America to have supremacy in terms of the missiles and the capability that we're building up, supposedly, even though that got depleted pretty quickly in this case. And also it allows us to keep doing this Israeli method of mowing the lawn where you bomb every few years. The problem with that is because America has depleted ourselves and humiliated ourselves to this extent, even so much that this guy is also somewhat forced to admit it, we now don't have the ability to just come back to this conflict or even just bomb them at some point in the future, because they know that they can drag us further into a conflict and make it a bigger bleed for us. And we have no conditions of this deal that hasn't even actually materialized yet that says that they don't control the Strait of Hormuz, which is the leverage point that they always had when it came to this. So degrading their missiles or whatever is great, even though you have Trump and Vance saying they have the right to their missile systems, they have the right to self-defense. So that means they're going to rebuild up that capacity. And in some amount of time, guys like this are going to be coming out again to say that we have to mow the lawn, we have to bomb them again. They're going to be justifying that. And so the Trump administration is kind of testing out how much they can get away with that. And it's been a failure. Their base has not let them get away with this bombing Iran strategy. So I imagine that that's going to interrupt the process of that going forward. And the unpopularity of guys like this and the ideology that he's professing, like I said before, it kind of doesn't matter. It's not as material as the fact that there just needs to be somebody who comes out and is willing to say this, and that provides cover for, this idea that there's anybody who thinks what we're doing out there is a good idea, or that America walked away from this with a win whatsoever. There just have to be people who are constantly putting their brain towards the pro-America, the pro-American imperialism style narrative, no matter what actually happens. And those people are never going to stop beating this drum. That's why they're going to be advocating for us to go to war in the future with Iran. They would have continuously been advocating for boots on the ground. It doesn't matter. Whatever is going to allow for the advancement of military use and therefore economic opportunities in that realm, which they view America permanently having the upper hand on, because America can dominate in all of these conflicts. So as long as there's a conflict happening, America and American weapons companies are going to be able to benefit from it somehow. And one of the few things that Trump is doing successfully right now on the home front is trying to create legal justifications for going after dissent, calling it Antifa, calling them rioters or far left anti-government activists, etc. And so cracking down on that is laying the groundwork to create a more secure situation for them to do things like this in the future. I mean, you've got protesters against ICE getting like 50 years, being directly targeted by the counterterrorism czar under Trump, going after people's free speech, just showing up at a protest, people that left a protest early before anything bad happened, or were moving zines that had radical information in them. These are the type of people that the Trump administration is targeting, and so far that has gone through the courts in places like Texas, and there's going to be more cases like this where they feel like they can get them through. And the purpose of that is to chill any actual resistance that might happen against the administration, and targeting actual pressure points that could create the incentive for the Trump administration to actually change its policy. They want to make it impossible to actually do that. So while the right wing is becoming more agitated on the issue issue of Israel and feeling like they're breaking from Trump, their ability to meaningfully see any movement away from that is changing, because the only force in any country that can meaningfully oppose militarism at its root is a sort of anti-capitalist and anti-colonialist type of motivation, because that's really what's going on here. It's not because Israel has the world hypnotized and is hypnotizing Donald Trump to go into Iran. It's because it suits American and Israeli capitalist interests to go on these type of excursions, and certainly in Israel's case, to try to expand into Lebanon, and all of the ethnic cleansing that they're doing is in the name of taking land and folding that into their imperialist project. So opposing that, opposing the profiteering that happens in these instances, the same profiteering that this guy no doubt gets his bread buttered from, that is the only meaningful opposition to this type of warmongering. It's the reason it hasn't stopped, because there is no meaningful opposition like that, and to the extent there is, it's being cracked down upon by the administration. So it's a 5-alarm fire going on as far as that's concerned. I'll put a link for people to donate to the Prairie Land defendants who just got handed life sentences by conservative judges in Texas for protesting ICE, because those rights and an explosion of resistance against this type of repression is what's going to be necessary to save this country and to save people in the countries that we are bombing, because the imperialist project of America is out of control.
I'm in the pocket, and they know they can't slow it, can't stop shit. How the game so cold, so toxic. Can't drop cause they're in somebody's pocket. For me that's not it.